codependency and narcissism are two sides of the same coin. And depending on where you fit in the spectrum, you will become a magnet. So you will be vibrationally attracted to somebody who is the opposite on that spectrum. What is up, soul fam? It's Sundar from Substance Over Style, and welcome to a new video. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, actually, but I haven't, excuse me, yes, excuse me, just want to get some incense on the go. Okay, so narcissism is one of my favorite topics. I haven't spoken about it on this channel, but it's a topic that comes up a lot with some of the women that I work with. So some of my clients who I've been coaching, it's a pattern that kind of plays out. Actually, I have talked about it on this channel, but I haven't done a video that's dedicated to it. So I kind of wanted to go into that a little bit because it's something that I know quite a lot about. It's something I have a lot of experience dealing with, not just in relationships, but also in not just in intimate relationships, but also in business relationships. So dealing with narcissists is very, very important, being able to do it. Now, firstly, I want to state something, that a lot of the time, people are very quick to point the finger and claim that somebody is a narcissist when they may not diagnose positively for narcissistic personality disorder, simply because that person is displaying narcissistic traits either in that moment with them or just in general, in that in that moment with them. That's all I wanted to say on that. So, you know, understand that this is a spectrum. One of the best books that I think that you can read about narcissism is this. There's several good ones. Wolf in Sheep's Clothing is a really good one to be able to identify the character traits. But The Human Magnet Syndrome, I think, is one of the most incredible books because it looks at it as a spectrum. So those of us who've studied universal law will understand the principle of duality, that two things can be the same in nature but just different in degree. And Ross Rosenberg, the author of The Human Magnet Syndrome, will basically discuss this idea that codependency and narcissism are two sides of the same coin. And depending on where you fit in the spectrum, you will become a magnet. So you will be vibrationally attracted to somebody who is the opposite on that spectrum. So the relationship will actually be quite compatible and stable, albeit very toxic and unhealthy. And until, you know, if you find that you keep on getting into relationships with narcissists, whether it's personal, intimate relationships, or whether it's, you know, business relationships, you've got family members who are narcissists, you have to work on your codependency issues, because the only thing that requires somebody to become narcissistic is for them to get into a relationship with somebody who's codependent. Because if you keep on sacrificing your own needs, then you will create that space for somebody else to put their needs first. So codependents often tend to be very empathic, very often very spiritual, but not necessarily. But a lot of the people that I work with tend to be very spiritual, I guess, just because of my content. So those are the type of people that are drawn to work with me. But they tend to have this idea of like this unconditional love and these like magical ideas of love, twin flame kind of stuff going on as well. I'm going to do a separate video talking about twin flames because it's come up quite a bit recently, and I want to dispel some misconceptions about it. But what's happening, the one thing that narcissists all have in common is a parasitic energy. Because as you know, if you've probably binge watched, you know, a lot of the videos, and there's a lot of really, really good videos on narcissism and different types of narcissism on YouTube, and I've watched a lot of them, and this is not going to be one of those videos, you'll find that there are so many different types. You know, there are people who are more cerebral, there are people who are, which is where they, you know, they gain their supply from, you know, having a great intellect and feeling superior to other people because of their incredible intellect. Then you've got the somatic narcissist, who, you know, is all about the body, and their body is, you know, their source of supply, and they use that to magnetize, you know, attention. And then you've got altruistic narcissists, who might, you know, are pillars of the community, and they maybe do a lot of work for charity. They might be activists, you know, that, like, a lot of the time people think that if somebody is an activist, then they must be a really good, kind, compassionate person who puts others before themselves. But often, a lot of the time, you'll get a lot of very prideful narcissistic people in these kinds of spaces, because they gain a sense of self-importance from their activism, because it makes them feel better, like they're superior to other people. Spiritual narcissists. There are so many spiritual narcissists. Oh my God. So what do narcissists all have in common, all the different types? They have a parasitic energy. So this is what I figured out what's going on with these people is, and this is from a more metaphysical perspective, okay? So I've not seen anybody talking about this in all of the millions and billions of videos on narcissism that I've read, is that they are hosting entities, okay? They're hosting archons or demons or whatever, thought forms possibly. They're hosting particular entities that have disconnected from source consciousness. So they need to feed off the energy of humans. And I've talked about this before in my videos. You Are Enough, Stop Feeding the Archons. That's drawn quite a lot of people, of a very niche audience, to my channel, because I think it came quite high up in the hits when you Google, you know, who are the Archons. And then also integrating the shadow. Okay, so in those two videos I talked about these kind of entities and what they will do. And look, I don't want to scare people, because that's not my intention, because they're really not, once you really actually get to know them, and once you actually face them and regularly interact with them, they're actually not scary at all. They're actually quite pathetic, and I feel quite sorry for them sometimes even. But yeah, they're beings that are disconnected from source. They're almost like little bratty children, and if you do regression therapy on them, you'll find that they are often, we create them. They're parts of our psyche, our subconscious, our shadow aspect. So what happens is, when a person is traumatized or experiences any kind of trauma, the psyche will split, so it creates soul fragments, and these soul fragments become disconnected from the person's essence, and they need to attach to either the person's wounding or wounding from somebody else in order to siphon energy. And this is what narcissists do. They have various thought forms that either they created or they picked up from other people, or they could be other types of entities. You know, there's not one particular type. That basically matches the vibration of whatever wound they're carrying. So let's be, you know, clear about this, that narcissists are very wounded people. They usually have experienced some kind of extreme trauma at the same time as being very coddled. This is the thing that I've noticed. So they have this sense of like importance and grandiosity, but at the same time a lot of, you know, trauma and unintegrated trauma. So, you know, their personality is very fragmented. So they're hosting all these different entities. They may just be hosting one. And this entity, if it cannot feed on their energy, they will need to find somebody else to feed off of. Okay, because this gives them their sense of importance and their grandiosity. Now, they will feed on you until they've sucked you dry, and that's when the devaluation stage occurs. So initially they will put you on a pedestal because they can see that you're a really good source of supply, and and that you embody all these traits that represent their unintegrated parts. So all the parts of themselves that are compassionate, that are giving, that are loving without question, and all these beautiful qualities that are on their own they are beautiful qualities, but at the same time, when you sacrifice your own needs, you know, for another in order to receive that person's love, they become very toxic, because you don't receive that person's love. It becomes very, very conditional. So when they start to siphon you for the energy, and then you become like a shell of a person through all their little jabs and everything, you know, all the emotional reactions that they're trying to get out of you, that the entity is feeding off of, then they'll discard you, or they'll start, you know, looking to other sources of supply as, you know, as another form of devaluation and disrespect, which is, you know, when a lot of people have had experience with narcissists cheating on them. But they don't even necessarily need to cheat on you. They could be getting this supply from anywhere. They could be getting it from your friends, and, you know, putting your friends on a pedestal in front of you while devaluing you. So these are some of the mind games that they play. So in order to heal from this, you really have to close that gap, and you have to start to integrate your shadows. So watch the video that I did on integrating the shadow, or the demonic self. You have to basically, usually they will be hosting an entity and you will be hosting an entity, and your entities are feeding off each other, which is where a lot of the time when people get involved with narcissists, sometimes they're just like, am I a narcissist? Because in order to survive the relationship, sometimes you have to become narcissistic. So if you want to know more about that, then watch my video on soulmates and soul streams, because I explain how attraction works and how you're basically always seeking greater expansion, because you're attracted to somebody that embodies, they're basically holding a mirror up of all your unintegrated traits that you need to basically integrate within yourself and need to embody in order to expand and achieve greater wholeness as you start to, you know, awaken, as you start to develop yourself more and grow. So where was I going? So as you start to embody some of their traits, you start to become narcissistic as well, and you start to play their game. So your entity and their entity are basically feeding on the other. So your entity is feeding off them, and their entity is feeding off you. So you need to start integrating your own demons and make friends with them and get to know them and find out what the wound is that you're carrying that's causing you to be attracted to this person. But you also need to integrate your shadows around being narcissistic. So a lot of the time, people who've suffered very severe narcissistic abuse will become narcissistic. So that's just the pendulum swinging in the opposite and equal direction before it reaches equilibrium. So if you can observe that process and just become the watcher of that process, then it can happen much faster, and you don't have to go through, you know, another toxic relationship where you end up with like a codependent person, or like with me, for example, after I got out of a very, very severely narcissistic relationship. This was like 15 years ago. I was very young. I started this bar job, and I had developed some extremely narcissistic traits after coming out of this relationship, because I'd idolized this person that I was with. And I ended up getting ghosted by my employer because they found it so difficult to be around me, because I was just devaluing some of the staff. I mean, some of them were not very professional, and the bar where I was working was like very new. It had just opened, and it wasn't doing that well in the beginning. So I really cared about, you know, I wanted to do a good job. I was healing from all of this abuse. I was just coming out of like a severe depression, and this job was like giving me a sense of purpose. So I wanted to do a really good job, and I wanted to see the business do well. So when I saw like other staff members like slacking off and, you know, ignoring customers while they're having like a gossipy little mothers meeting, I would say, guys, you know, that customer was standing there for like 5 minutes, you know, and you guys were just standing there chatting. And, you know, there were a couple of other things that I said that people found offensive. So they ghosted me, and I got fired from that job. So I then became very depressed again. I was just like, you know, I was healing from all this depression and narcissistic abuse, and now I just got fired, and I'm back where I started. And I really had to do a lot of self-reflection. I had to be like, holy shit, I've become just like him, and I don't want to be like that. Like, he was so horrible to me, and I really had to start to realize that, yes, I did need to integrate some of his traits, because I was, you know, very codependent and, you know, had a lot of self-esteem issues and was not in my power at all at that time. So yeah, I did have to embody some of his traits, but not go as far as he did. And that's when I kind of brought the pendulum back into the middle, and I started being more balanced. Not saying that I was healed immediately, like we're always expanding and healing, and there was a lot more work that I needed to do and still need to do. But this is the process that you might find yourself going through. So yeah, there is definitely a spiritual component to what's going on with narcissists. Can they heal? You know, most of the professional opinions on the subject is that they don't heal, they get worse, mainly because, you know, it serves them. But personally, I do think that they can mellow out, especially if they suffer really, really negative consequences. The only way that they can heal is if they lose everything. Like if they develop a really, really bad reputation where everybody knows how they are and nobody wants to deal with them anymore. But as long as they can continue to find sources of supply, I wouldn't count on it. So, you know, even if you get like a shaman or you know, some kind of spiritual healer to bind and banish the entity, and it can be done, that doesn't mean that they won't just make, you know, they won't just find another entity to contract with. And people aren't conscious of doing this, like it's a subconscious thing that happens. I actually experienced it recently with a person that I was in a relationship with, where my mentor at the time identified that this person was hosting an entity. And I fully believe it, because he was displaying some narcissistic traits. And this is where I say it's a spectrum. So once my mentor identified that he, you know, this guy's hosting an entity, the entity's feeding on you, and I was just like, that's interesting, because he was definitely displaying some narcissistic traits, and I kind of had my guard up, and they were still early days, and I was just observing him. He bound and managed the entity, and I made the guy aware of this, and I said, listen, you've been hosting this entity, and I said, this is how your behavior was coming across as well, and I don't want any part of that. But it's also because I was much more in my power, and I was just like, I'm not going to tolerate, you know, behavior like negging and things like that, you know, all of these tactics that narcissists will use to devalue you and to knock you off your pedestal and make you feel inferior and less than. I was not having any of it. So because I was not codependent, he had to get rid of any narcissistic traits that he was displaying. So yeah, it is sometimes a spectrum, so just be aware of that if you feel like, you know, you might be involved with a narcissist. As long as you know that you're putting your own needs first, and you're listening to the wisdom of your body. If something doesn't feel good to you, and you're speaking your truth and saying, hey, I don't like that, like I find that a turn off, like I don't like it when you speak to me like that. You don't have to say it in that way. You know, there are ways that you can say it that draw somebody closer in. Then you don't really need to worry about it. Another thing that I did to heal it that I really recommend was Kambo. So I did a Cowboy Ceremony in Bali, and it kind of cleared any... Kambo is amazing. It basically clears your lymphatic system, but it also works multidimensionally. So it clears like your etheric body of any emotional trauma that it's holding on to, because that's your emotional pain body. So you're basically, any traumas, those thought forms, those entities will be lodged in the emotional body. So it clears that. So you have to use intention. So I went into the ceremony saying I want to clear whatever it is that's causing me to get involved with people who are either narcissists or displaying narcissistic traits, and I want to clear this throughout my ancestry as well, because usually it will play out through, you know, your parents or your grandparents. You may have somebody who is narcissistic, or has narcissistic traits, or a codependent parent. So that kind of dynamic might be at play. So you've inherited that from the examples that were displayed to you as a child. It clears it, but it doesn't clear it. It dislodges it, so that when, you know, I still notice some of the patterns coming up. So when it dislodges it, then you can become aware of the patterns. You can see them playing up. And when you are aware of them, you can create new ways of being. And that's what heals it. So yeah, it's an interesting process. I definitely recommend you look up your local Cowboy practitioner if that's something that you are struggling with. As always, I'm also here if you want to book a session with me. You can send me a DM on Instagram. That's how I'm booking my sessions at the moment. So yeah, just send me a message if you want help with anything like this. If this video has helped you, then like, subscribe and share it. It all helps boost the algorithm, and the more you help me, the more I can help you. And feel free to suggest any video topics in the comment box below. I will love you and leave you soul fam. Till next time, one love.
You're introduced to LSD, and unless you've taken some other drug, like for instance like marijuana or something, well, you know, it's an altogether new thing, and you actually can have a religious experience